So before we define kind of short run equilibrium and kind of talk about three different possible cases in terms of positive profit, no profit, or losses in this short run equilibrium, let's first talk about shutdown. And so when we're talking about shutdown in these competitive markets, we're referring to something in particular. We're referring to like a short run decision. And so we want to differentiate between short run decisions not to produce anything versus long run decisions to completely just kind of leave the market. So we're going to talk about shutdown versus exit. So these are going to be slightly different concepts. So they're going to be different concepts. One's about short run, one's about long run. So when we say shutdown, so let's talk about shutdown first. So this is a short run, so SR for short run, decision not to produce anything. So Q equals 0. Like the individual firm is deciding just not to produce anything. So think of this as like, the examples are going to be like a golf course. It's a golf course in the winter, or a ski hill or snowboard hill in the summer. Some of these firms kind of shut down. Some of them stay open and do kind of events if they have places for events like weddings and things like that. But some firms in these industries just kind of shut down for the winter. They don't leave. They don't. They're going to be open again the next year, but they just shut down for a period of time. They just don't produce anything. We're going to contrast this kind of short run decision about shutting down and not producing anything to this exit decision. And this is a long run decision to exit the industry. / market. So shutdown is just about a golf course maybe closing down in the winter. Exiting would be that golf course deciding we can't sustain this, I'm going to sell this golf course, or I'm going to do something else with this land. So it's important to kind of differentiate between these two different concepts. So the key difference here, if you shut down, you still pay fixed cost. Have to pay the fixed costs. So remember that there's fixed costs in the short run. And so even if you're producing nothing, even if your small q, your lowercase q equals 0, you still have to pay, rent, any loan payments and stuff like that, even if you're not producing anything. Remember, that's the definition of fixed costs. So that's the key difference here, is if you shut down, you still have to pay the fixed costs. If you exit, in the long run, you don't have to pay any costs. There's 0 costs. Remember, because in the long run, by definition, there are no fixed costs. Okay, so we're going to draw out a graph to kind of demonstrate this idea of when you should shut down versus when you shouldn't, and hopefully that will kind of help with this, differentiating these two concepts. But really, shutdown's a short-run decision not to produce anything, and we're going to kind of ignore fixed costs. We're going to kind of think about fixed costs as being sunk costs. We'll talk about the idea of sunk costs, and we want to differentiate that between kind of completely leaving an industry and kind of exiting an industry, and that's going to be a long-run decision. So let's take a closer look at the shutdown decision. So the short-run decision to basically just not produce anything. So let's contrast the benefits of shutting down and the costs, and that's going to allow us to come up with criteria about whether we should shut down or open up. Even if we're open up and make a loss, maybe that's better than shutting down. So the benefits of shutting down is that you save the variable costs. Right, if you don't produce anything, remember variable costs are costs that vary with production, you're going to have no variable costs. But you still have to pay fixed costs. They are sunk costs. So remember, fixed costs are just not going to come into the equation at all here. Fixed costs are costs that don't vary with production. We have to pay it no matter what. And so our decision in the short run to produce or not to produce shouldn't have anything to do with these fixed costs because we already have to pay them. We've already signed a lease for our store or our parking spot for our burrito truck. Nothing about our decisions about how much to produce now is going to affect that we have to pay rent or that we have to pay back a loan payment or a mortgage or something like that. So there's sunk costs. Sunk costs are costs that you've kind of already outlaid and you can't get back. So maybe you can think about sunk costs as like a non-refundable flight somewhere. I know it's crazy to think about flying too much anywhere, but a non-refundable flight. So if you've already paid, let's say you paid for a flight to go on vacation. That's for some time in the future. And all of a sudden something comes up. You have an exam schedule got released and you realize, oh, you actually have an exam. When you decide whether to go to your exam or go on vacation, you shouldn't be considering the cost of your non-refundable ticket because you've already spent that. There's no getting it back. You should be thinking about the marginal benefit and the marginal cost of going to your exam versus going on vacation. You've already paid for that flight. And this is the same idea here with the firms. They've already, got their mortgage or their loan for their production facility. They've already paid, they still have to pay rent because they signed a contract to rent a certain place or a lease to rent a certain place. They can't get that money back. Their short-run decision to shut down has nothing to do with these fixed costs because fixed costs are sunk. Sunk costs are a very important kind of concept, and you should think about, what sunk costs are in your kind of everyday decisions as well. But anyway, let's get back from that sidebar and get back to this decision from the firm to produce or not to produce. So the benefits are you get to save the variable costs. You still have to pay the fixed costs because they're sunk. The cost of shutting down is the total revenue you give up. If you're not producing anything, you can't bring any money in. And so we should shut down if total revenue is less than total average cost. Variable cost, not total average cost, total variable cost. So that's our decision, right? This is the costs of shutting down is total revenue. This is the benefits. So we should shut down if the benefits of shutting down are bigger than the costs of shutting down. And that's what this is saying. Now, if we think about dividing both of these sides by Q, so nothing's really going to change, we can think of saying that this total revenue over Q is actually equal to the price, right? Let's do that in a different color. Oops. So remember, total revenue over Q is average revenue, and in this market, the average revenue equals the price, or the marginal revenue. So price, this price doesn't change, it's constant. And total variable cost divided by Q, by definition, is just average variable cost. And so this is the shutdown criteria here. We should shut down if the price is below the average variable cost. So let's draw price and quantity. So this is just an individual firm here. Oops. So an individual firm. So remember, they have these marginal cost curve that looks like this. We have this ATC. Again, It's not perfect because it should go through the minimum point. That's maybe a bit better. This is the ATC, and then lower down we have the AVC, right? The average variable cost. And it's going to get closer and closer. Again, it's going to go through this minimum point, and then it's going to get closer and closer to the average total cost, since average fixed costs are going to be falling. All right, so basically what we're saying in this criteria here is, I'm just trying to find color, green will work. You know, the market price is determined by this, you know, we usually draw another market beside it, or sorry, another graph beside it, which is the market, right? With the big supply and demand curves that determine the price here. So what we're doing here is we're thinking about different prices that market could have and how that's going to impact the individual firm. So we're kind of ignoring this market over here and just thinking about the consequences of that market in terms of setting this price. So what our criteria here is that if price is below average variable cost, we should shut down. So here you want to shut down. If the price is, sorry, I'm getting a little smudge in there, but we should shut down if the price is below the average variable cost. So this is kind of like the shutdown price, right? Where the price, you know, equals the average variable cost. If the price equals the average variable cost, we're kind of indifferent between opening up or not. But any price below that, we want to shut down. Then let's think about what happens on prices between. So Q equals 0. So prices between average fixed cost and average total cost. Well, you don't shut down. You should produce, but the profit's going to be negative, right? If you have a price between, you know, this point here, so let's say, I'm just going to put P profit or something like that. If the price is at least, if the price is equal to the average total cost, then they're going to break even. The price is greater than the average total cost, they're going to make a profit. If the price is between the ATC and the AVC, then you're going to, you know, you're still going to produce because you're at least covering your variable costs, but you're going to make a negative profit. But a negative profit, the negative profit you make by producing is going to be, I mean, it's going to be a less of a loss than if you didn't produce at all. Any kind of price above this ATC point, we're going to have positive profit. So if we want to think about how much the firm is going to produce at different points, so this is kind of summing up the shutdown here. So let's think about now the short run supply curve for a firm. So what we're thinking about with the short run supply curve for the firm is it's kind of mapping out on this graph how much the firms would produce. Well, if they shut down, they're not producing anything. So price below AVC, this is what the supply curve for the firm looks like. As soon as the price hits the AVC, they'll produce this amount. And then remember, they produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. I wish I had one more color here so I could differentiate, or I wish I drew this AVC as a different color. Maybe I'll try to go over it with purple so it comes up slightly different. But this orange line is the short run supply curve for the firm. A price below this average variable cost, they produce nothing, so that's why it's here. And then all of a sudden, maybe I can put an open. It's a little bit discontinuous, right? Because then it is discontinuous, because as soon as the price hits AVC, as soon as the price is equal to the average variable cost, they'll produce, and they'll produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and they'll produce all along this marginal cost curve, right? Because that's the profit maximizing quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And so we have this kind of discontinuous short run supply curve for the firm. because you're at least, because because you can't even cover your variable costs, you shouldn't open up, but we should open up as soon as we at least make our variable costs back. And then with that information, we can kind of draw out this short run supply curve for the firm.